Good evening, everyone, and welcome back once again to our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series as we are talking with paralegal and lawyer bencher candidates. As always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone, and they don't reflect me, Justice and Pieces, Trials College, or any of the other education institutions or organizations that I'm affiliated with. Continuing on, we had Dimitra just a few minutes ago wrapping up, and now we have another member of the Good Governance Coalition and incumbent bencher, the only incumbent bencher on the paralegal side, Michelle Lomazzo, joining us. So thanks so much, Michelle, first of all, for taking the time to speak with us.
Oh, thank you, JP and David, for what you're doing. I think it's fabulous. We need to engage voters, and I can't imagine a better way to draw people in and make them aware of the issues and why they should vote on April 19th. So thanks to both of you.
And Michelle, maybe you can start. You can tell us a little bit more about yourself and perhaps also tell us about the role of a bencher. Right? I think, the best perspective, I think, from someone who's been in that role and the only of the paralegal bencher candidates that's been in that role. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is to be a bencher.
So a little bit about me. I've been a paralegal my entire adult life. I finished my undergrad degree and thought I'd go to law school. I was getting married at the time and saw a posting for a worker advisor with the Ministry of Labor. And remember reading the job description and thinking, geez, this would be a great job for me. I could advocate for injured workers and not have to go to law school. And so I was lucky. I got the job. It was a bilingual posting. I'm bilingual. And I worked for the ministry for 6 years. I got trained by them how to advocate for injured workers, how to read legislation, how to interpret things, how to analyze them, and so on. And so I had paid on the job training, which was fabulous. And then I hung my own shingle. I decided to open my own practice. I worked from home long before it was popular to work from home. And it worked out great because I could get my kids off to school and then go to my office and work until it was time to pick them up or get to the school to watch their sporting events or whatever they were doing. And I've worked in WSIB for more than 30 years. I love doing WSIB appeals. I can't tell you how rewarding of a field it is. I have clients. I have one in particular who was so grateful that he told me if I ever needed a kidney to come and see him. That's how much he appreciated what I did for him and his family. So it is super rewarding work. I love it. I continue to do it to this day. About, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or so, I got an adjudication job at the Landlord and Tenant Board. And actually, it was called the Rental Housing Tribunal at the time. And I went for the training. I think it was a few months, and it was just a part-time job. I just wanted to see if I would like it. I got to tell you, I did the training. I started adjudicating, and I really didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I thought I'd rather be arguing cases. And more importantly, I had no interest in the topic, renters, and I had no interest. So I did it for about 6 months. And then, I remember some of my friends saying to me, you can't say no to a government appointment. And I said, watch me. I can't do something I don't love. So I stepped down. And then I was audited by the Law Society. It was the worst year ever. And I got audited by the Law Society, and the auditor was in my office for 2 entire days. She went through everything and told me at the end of it, you did great. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, do you want to teach? And I said, teach what? And she said, how to open a paralegal practice for the Law Society. We do CPDs all the time. And I said, I have no interest in teaching and I'm way too busy. I just don't have time. So she called me about 6 months later and said, left me a voice message. And I got to tell you, my heart hit my toes. I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. They must have found something. Sure enough, I called her back and she said, I'm just calling you because we have a posting at the Law Society for a bilingual paralegal adjudicator at the Law Society Tribunal for discipline matters. And I said, yes. And she said, well, I'm calling you because I thought of you right away. I thought you'd be interested. You'd be great at it. And I said, I have no interest in adjudicating. Tried it once before, didn't like it. We talked a little bit about it. And she said, I think you would really like this. And I said, all right, let me think about it. I applied. I got hired. It's just part-time. You know, you might do it 10 days, 15 days a year kind of thing. And I loved it. So I did it for 6 years before I decided to become a bencher. And it was while I was adjudicating that many other benchers, lawyer benchers, paralegal benchers started saying, why don't you run for bencher? And I said, well, I've kind of done it backwards. I joined the Law Society as an adjudicator. Most people get elected a bencher and then become an adjudicator. It's one of the duties if you choose to adjudicate for the Law Society Tribunal. And so that's sort of how I entered the bencher field. And, you know, the role of a bencher is serious work for serious people. JP, it takes a ton of time. And I have to tell you, over the last 2 years, I've sat on 7 or 8 committees each year. Committee work is where all the work really gets done. I mean, convocation is one thing. You show up, you debate an issue. It's already been analyzed, researched, discussed at committee, and then the committee sends a report to convocation, and then that's where it's voted on. But the role of a bencher is largely to oversee the Law Society of Ontario. It's to make policy to ensure competence of paralegals and lawyers in the public interest. So we're fortunate we get to self-regulate at the Law Society. Not, you know, some countries have lost their self-regulation. But the role of a bencher is an extremely important role. In addition to that, we attend calls to the bar. We go to welcome receptions for newly licensed paralegals. It's a lot of work, and I would venture to guess it takes about 50% of my time.
Now, with that in mind, I mean, you're seeking re-election this time. So why are you coming back for something that's taking so much of your time? What do you want to do if you're elected again? Well,
you know, some people might think that I need my head examined, and sometimes I think I do too. You know, it's not the kind of job where it's largely ungrateful. You know, people are never happy. I think that's just the reality. It's easier for people to criticize than it is to support. I am always open to listen to people. I'm open to new ideas. But the reality is within the paralegal profession, we have to learn that we need to lift each other up rather than keep pulling each other down if we're going to get the respect that we deserve as a paralegal profession. And so I believe in my first term that I accomplished what I set out to accomplish, and there's still a lot more work to do. which is why I want to go back. I'm hoping voters will reelect me. I mean, JP, there's a lot to learn. It's a huge learning curve. And just by the time you hit your stride, your term is almost over. And because, Rob Byrd just finished doing 13 years. Kathy Corsetti just finished her 13 years. Marian Lipa just decided not to run again, but she had done 8 years. And Shalina Lalji did 1 term. And so, and by the way, I'll take this opportunity to thank all of them for their service, because it is largely a thankless job. We're just trying to do what we believe is best for the profession to advance it. And it's not easy, but I do believe that we need some of that institutional knowledge, because otherwise, if there are 5 brand new benchers that go to the Law Society, good luck. It's going to be a nightmare. So hopefully I will be reelected long enough that I can lead a new group of paralegal benchers. And there's all kinds of things that we've started that I want to make sure happen in this next term. It's important to keep doing the good work that we've been doing.
Now, on that, I guess this term or this campaign a little different than the last time, because you're running as part of the Good Governance Coalition, and certainly, you've been on convocation, so you have that perspective of, there was the Stop SOP group, as it was then called. Now they're running 35 lawyer candidates and endorsing, I believe, some paralegal candidates as the Full Stop group. And then you have the Good Governance Coalition on the other side, so to speak, that have kind of created this, where you're against the concept of their slate from the last time. So you're running as a coalition this time, and they're running as a slate again this time. And if you're elected, you're going to do away with sort of this group ideology, slates and coalitions potentially altogether. But some people are sort of, we're talking about criticism, but like that seems kind of a big criticism as to how does this kind of all fit together in terms of, it's like if you put in like an if-then sort of statement, it doesn't quite make sense. But maybe you can help me make understanding of how all of this connects and it makes perfect sense for you and the members of the coalition.
So first of all, I am thrilled that the lawyer benchers candidates invited paralegals to be part of the coalition. And I think it's just reflective of the fact of how inclusive they are. The slate doesn't have any paralegals on their team. And I think it is reflective of the fact that they don't think paralegals are important. And I think that's a shame, because each of the lawyer bencher candidates who've agreed to run for the coalition have asserted and confirmed that paralegals are an integral part of access to justice. So there's a big plus. It's good news for paralegals, because it means we will have some friends in convocation. And I think that's huge. The other part of it is, you have to fight fire with fire. And they were running another slate. How do you address it? They on their last slate, they had 22 candidates. All 22 got elected. So how else do you address that kind of slate unless you run your own against it? And, the other piece of it is we haven't said we'll abolish slates. We said we would strike a committee to review whether or not slates should be allowed at election time, or if candidates should run independently. So I think, there was no choice on our part. You have to fight fire with fire, and that is what we've done. The reality, though, JP, is that each of us, each paralegal candidate, each lawyer candidate, have their own platform. They have their own issues that are near and dear to their heart. And we've each committed to advancing our own platforms, our own ideas, not voting as a block. In fact, you mentioned earlier, and it's true, the day we're elected, hopefully elected, the coalition goes away. So we're not, it's not party politics, and it shouldn't be. We're about debating, respectfully debating issues at convocation and returning decorum to convocation. That's what the coalition is about.
I guess this is a little unique for me on the paralegal side, because now I can ask you, well, here's what you've been doing in the last 4 years. And I guess the first question, I mean, probably you get or you hear of at least comments of, well, hey, we had Michelle in and look at what happened to the family law scope for us. Where's immigration law? You know, what about divisional court? You know, is it Michelle's fault, or is it Kathy Corsetti's fault, or Marianne, whoever? Why don't we have that? And that's why we need new benchers, because we're going to do things differently. So how would you respond? Because I'm sure you hear that or see that often. What would you say kind of in response to why things came out, how they came out? And for those who are looking at expansion of scope for paralegals as number one, I mean, at least everyone's talked about it that I've spoken to. So clearly top of mind for paralegals and the candidates, but maybe you can kind of give us a little bit more of kind of what happens behind the scenes that resulted in how things result and how things may go differently the next time.
So it's a great question. I chuckle when I hear some of the candidates talk about what they're going to do when they get to the Law Society and when they're elected bencher, because I think there's a misunderstanding about what benchers do. So, you know, this idea that you're going to get benefits for paralegals, insurance, health insurance benefits. You know, I have Blue Cross coverage. I pay, I don't know, $400 and some a month for my own healthcare coverage. I can't imagine. It just doesn't make sense. It's not our role as a bencher. Our role as a bencher is to govern in the public interest and to improve access to justice. That's our role. So let's not lose. Sometimes I think people can't separate the forest from the trees, mostly because they don't understand what the role of a bencher is. I had these lofty ideas about how things were going to change when I got to the Law Society. And I have to tell you, you get really disillusioned when you get there. It's a huge organization, and you can't snap your fingers and say, this is what's going to happen. You're working within a committee. You have to get buy-in from the other benchers. And not only do you have to get buy-in, but you have to understand how it all works within this process. And what happened with the FLSP was very disappointing, very, very disappointing. I think I was as devastated as every other paralegal bencher. You know, 4 of us voted for the FLSP, and Rob Bird said, no, I'm not voting for it. And I understand Rob's position. At the end of the day, I had to vote in favor, and I canvassed the lawyer benchers to get them to vote in favor, because I didn't want us to not get any expansion of scope. We need to have the FLSP because the people of Ontario need representation in family law matters. So it's a foot in the door. It's unfortunate we couldn't get more. But the reality is, JP, is that there's a family law, Family Law Rules Committee, and they dictate who can appear before them in family law courtrooms. If the judges won't give us a right of appearance, or if they won't agree that we can go in and present these matters, you're not going in. It's that simple. And that's what it came down to. The judiciary came back and said, we're prepared to allow paralegals to do this much. Let's see how that goes. The Law Society, I was the one who asked that the motion include a review in, I forget if it was 2 years, I believe so. And we amended the motion to include that review so that we can then say, look how great we've been doing. Isn't this wonderful? We're helping all these people in Ontario. Now let us do more. We've shown we can do it. So give us the opportunity. So I think it's really important to understand that you don't just snap your fingers and things happen at convocation. It is, or at the Law Society, it's a long process. And I've got to tell you, I think my WSIB background has helped me to understand that process, because WSIB is a huge bureaucracy and it takes 5-6 years sometimes to get final decisions from the beginning of your appeal up to the tribunal. So it just, I think it's wonderful to go in with all of these hopes and dreams. I think realistically, you learn to temper them. You have no choice. You got to figure out which things are hills you're prepared to die on and what things you can negotiate or get other benchers to support you on so you can advance something. You have to be able to figure out, a bull in a china shop doesn't work at convocation. It doesn't. And you have to be prepared to build bridges, not burn them. So when it comes to expansion of scope, it's a challenge. We know that inherently two professions that govern each other, where lawyers have way more votes at convocation than paralegals do, it's a problem. And so we have to be careful. We have to research. We have to make sure whatever we're putting forward will go ahead. And if you don't have the votes for it, there's no point in doing it. So will we get further expansion? I think so. I do. I mean, now, paralegals can go to Superior Court for these motions, the FLSP rights of appearance. If we can be there for that, why can't we be there or at divisional court to do our own appeals in LTB, POA, or small claims court? Why do paralegals have to pass that file off to lawyers? I don't think we should. And so now that we've got this foot in the door with the FLSP, we'll get our review in 2 years. We'll try to expand the scope then. I think it's a great idea. I think it will get us now with our foot in the door at divisional court and Superior Court. And I can't speak to the immigration expansion because unfortunately, or fortunately, I sit on the board of the Law Society and we're currently being sued with respect to the immigration piece. So I can't speak to that at all.
Now, I mean, I guess in terms of those areas, I mean, one of the things that you brought up, obviously, is you need the votes. And now, even within the Good Governance Coalition, I know there was like a little FOLA, the Federation of Law Associations, had a little survey of sorts of the candidates who would respond. And there's a couple of questions relating to paralegals in terms of scope, and I think something about a competency fund that I saw, different responses, both from the coalition and the other lawyer bencher candidates. But do you feel that because you're running as part of this coalition and you've gotten an opportunity to work alongside them, and you said, well, they respect the importance of paralegals, that discussions, again, we don't know the future, we don't know if even if you're going to get elected, but if comes up at convocation over the next 4 years, do you see things in terms of scope in other areas being, or certainly even just the 2 year or 3 years to review, that discussion being different or being received differently because the makeup is different, or potentially the makeup could be different than the last time? Or what are some strategies in terms of getting to that magic 27 votes, right? Because ultimately, any one of the candidates I talked to today can have all these amazing ideas. And, I think I can say that, everyone I've spoken to has at least one point that I find myself nodding my head to. But how do you go from that and getting it through convocation? And what do you think is going to be different this time around?
Well, I can tell you, JP, that the slate, we got a lot of opposition on expansion of scope from the slate members. That was disappointing. This time, I'm hoping the coalition lawyers are elected. Do I think it will be a slam dunk to get expansion of scope? No, I don't. It's not an easy piece to push forward. And largely that's because the paralegal education has the curriculum set. It can change. And there are some changes that just came, a report I delivered the end of February at convocation about changes to the curriculum. But there has to be a full discussion around how do we set this up? We currently have almost 11,000 paralegals who have been through one particular program, right? And so where do they get their education or their knowledge from? And remember, the role of the LSO is competency. That means making sure that licensees, lawyers, and paralegals have the skill set and the knowledge to do what they're doing. And so when we start going to some of these other areas of practice, we have to figure out, how do we get this knowledge for paralegals? So one of the things that I'm proposing and have been working on I put the curriculum together for a 1-year paralegal WSIB program. And the college in Windsor started actively about a year ago, moving it forward. So what it will be is a graduate program. The Law Society will have nothing to do with it, right? It's a graduate program that any paralegal can attend to get the knowledge they need and the experience of presenting in before WSIB hearings and before the tribunal, so that people can get the knowledge. Like, part of the problem is most paralegals, we get the annual report and we look at the data, and the data says that 75 to 80% of paralegals practice in POA, small claims court, and LTB. I call those the big three. And so I'm getting worried because I started in WSIB over 30 years ago. I see a retirement in my future in about 5 years or so. And so who's going to carry the torch? Who's going to represent the people of Ontario who need WSIB representation? As it is, my clients come to me, many of them, and they'll say, they'll tell me what happened and I'll say, okay, what have you been doing about money for the last 5 years? This happened 5 years ago, right? Yeah, well, I lost my house and we had to go on social assistance or, whatever the case may be. We used up all of our savings. And I asked them, why didn't you come to me sooner? And they say, I had no idea you existed. I didn't know. So, that's a problem. We have to make sure that the public knows there are paralegals, what our roles are, what we can do for them. And I think a large part of that is paralegal associations. But I also think a big part of that is the Law Society. And we had a budget to do an education campaign for the people of Ontario about the role of paralegals. And the slate voted against that budget. So it didn't happen. So there's a lot of work that we want to advance. There's a lot of work that we want to get done during this next term. And I'm hopeful I'm reelected so I can do some of those things. And it would be nice to see the colleges like the one you teach at become the hub for human rights appeals. So you offer some kind of graduate course that paralegals can come back. I mean, I can't tell you the number of paralegal classes that I walked into prior to COVID and asked students, how many of you would take a 1-year WSIB program if it were offered? And I'm going to tell you, in a classroom of 300 people, about half the hands went up. I mean, paralegals are hungry for the information. They don't know where to get it. And it's really important. And I think it's part of our role at the LSO to figure out our job is competency, ensuring competency. Then we need to figure out a way to get these specialized areas of law out to the information to paralegals so that they can learn about it.
Now that gets into another sort of big issue there is you're mentioning the big three in numbers, but what about the numbers that are just leaving the profession altogether, right? And in terms of they may go through the process, go through school, get their credentials, write the licensing exam, get licensed, right? No, it used to be Robert Bird. I guess now it's the torch has been passed to you to comment on LinkedIn. Welcome to the profession. And then a month or so later, they get the thing to put up on the wall, and then they're sharing about that. And then some of them you don't hear anything more, and then they're in back into the old field, or they may be in the legal field, but they're working as law clerks or legal assistants. But again, what's the role of the Law Society in kind of, what's the answer to where they're going, and then two, what can be done to kind of keep them in the profession? Because I mean, that speaks to a huge problem of, why am I going through this whole process if in the end I'm going to just go and do something completely different and not make use of the license that I have?
It's a good question, JP. I can tell you that Rob Bird initiated a comprehensive study of the paralegal profession. I want to say maybe he started it the year that I was elected. And we did extensive consultation with paralegals, and including focus groups, surveys, all kinds of data, so that we could understand why paralegals were either leaving the profession or not practicing in the area at all. And it was really interesting. It was a comprehensive study. There were two huge parts to it. And what we found, or what we were told, was that most paralegals don't feel competent or confident enough to practice, to hang their own shingle when they complete their program. And so we listened to what paralegals said. And in the last year, I mentioned earlier, we presented at convocation a proposal for what we're going to do going forward. So the first thing is doubling field placements. 120 hours is just not enough. So we moved it to 240 hours. And I think that will make a huge difference for paralegal students. In fact, I've talked to all kinds of new licensees who have said to me, it is a great idea. I wish I had had 240 hours. So that's one of them. The other one is student right of appearance. So law students have it. Paralegal students and paralegal licensees waiting to get licensed will also have it now. And so it will give the opportunity, if I have a student working for me or on a placement, they can go to my hearing for me and present a case, and I don't need to be there. So it will give them all of this hands-on opportunity. And that's what paralegal students need, to be able to finish school and feel confident enough to be able to walk into the courtroom and argue a motion. So I think both of those things are huge. The other thing we did this year was we increased the experience of both paralegal program directors and paralegal teachers, so that they had to have more experience practicing. I think it's super important, because that's how, students learn, by hearing you talk about your experience, right? And so I think those changes, along with, there were some curriculum changes to some compulsory courses that they increased hours and so on. I mean, as a bencher, we don't get involved in that. The Law Society hires, they have education experts. If we're not education experts, we don't know. So they hire people who are education experts and who make the recommendations based on all the data we collected from paralegals through the comprehensive studies. And so we've done a lot of work. We've done a ton of work. I think one of the worst things the Law Society does is maybe they're not very good at telling licensees what it is that they've done. And so, licensees think you're not doing much. The hard part is all of that work at committee is in camera. If we were to not do it in camera, can you imagine what paralegals would be saying? Wait a minute, what are you talking about? I thought you were doubling placements. Now you're not doing that? Like, can you imagine? So we can't. It has to be in camera. And then once a decision is, then we come to convocation with the proposal. Once there's a vote, then it's made public. So I think the Law Society could do maybe a little bit better at communicating initiatives that we have participated in and the things that we've accomplished.
Yeah, because I think what you're talking about in terms of the study, I don't know if that was ever really sort of publicly shared, or in terms of here's a report that the public, or paralegal colleges or whoever the stakeholders can learn more about. But yes, certainly adding additional hours into internships. I don't know in terms of, I guess, your education experts in terms of fleshing out, because personally, it'd be nicer to have those hours spread out throughout your time rather than just 240 hours at the end, because you could kind of see matters, even if it's like every Friday for 4 hours, you can see something all the way through. But in terms of, I guess, the paralegals that are already licensed, right? And again, obviously the next generation, the students that I have and that will come in the future, will have the opportunity with longer programs, more professional opportunities in terms of internships and things like that. But for those who are already licensed, right? They're in that sort of position now that, well, look, I've become licensed. I feel that I don't have those competencies. Now, you've mentioned certainly colleges like out in Windsor, they can create programs for graduates, right? Paralegals can get additional continuing professional development, things like that. But I mean, there's other, coaching advisory network. I mean, what else, I mean, is missing in that piece that, from this comprehensive survey, perhaps that can be done for existing licensees to prevent them from leaving the profession and in large numbers. And I will sort of preface, though, we'll say that some people, if you're working in-house, let's say in HR, that you may not necessarily need to use the license, right? It doesn't mean that everyone that goes through. I mean, I'm teaching. I don't necessarily need to be still practicing anymore, right? But what about? I mean, excluding those cases, what about those who are already licensed that are choosing not to stay in the profession? What can be done to address them?
So, JP, part of, I think it was interesting. I was speaking with a colleague the other day about this, and I said, look, there's a huge difference between the education and the resources a lawyer has to go through compared to a paralegal. So let's not compare apples and oranges. Lawyers generally have an undergrad degree and then 3 years of law school plus a year of articling to the tune of, $50, $60, $70, $80, $100,000 for law school. Paralegals, on the other hand, can finish high school and go to paralegal college. And so the investment is much shorter. So do a program, I'm not sure what it is at Trios, but I'm going to guess it's a year and about $10,000 for tuition, maybe more. I don't know. It's around there anyways. If you talk to college students, many of them have more than one college diploma. So they've done a law clerk program, and then they do a paralegal program, or they've done, the security program, and then, or police foundations, whatever it is, and then do a paralegal program, or they think they want to be a dental assistant and then say, forget that, I don't want to do that at all, I want to be a paralegal. Our investment is not nearly as substantial as law school is. And so you're going to see attrition. Do I think there's things that we could be doing for paralegals? Absolutely. And we're doing some of them. So let's talk about it. Bridge to practice. It has always existed for lawyers. Last year, Paralegal Standing Committee, we got bridge to practice for paralegals. So paralegals, anybody can go on the Law Society website and see the courses being offered. They're free. Go on, take them, and get yourself the information you need so that you can consider, you can do what it is that you want. The other thing I think we have to do for existing paralegals is show them the other areas of practice. There are over 200 boards and tribunals that paralegals can appear before. Why aren't we appearing before them? Because, we're human beings, and as creatures of comfort, what we do is, paralegals go through the paralegal program and they're taught POA, small claims court, and LTB. So what do? They leave, and that's the area they practice in. So I understand it, but we have to make them aware that there are options available to them. And I have to tell you, JP, that the Law Society has so many resources available to paralegals and lawyers. And if paralegals don't take time to navigate the Law Society's website and teach themselves what's available to them, they're doing themselves a huge disservice, because that's kind of like walking around with a blindfold. You need to know what's available. There are all kinds of programs available. And so do I think we can do more? Yes, I think we can advertise and explain to the public what paralegals do so that we can get more work for paralegals. We need to establish relationships with lawyers. We're working on it through the Federation of the Law Society. I just met with Doug Judson from FOLA, I don't know, last month. I met with Karen Houlihan, with the last Treasurer Donnelly, and Kathy Corsetti about just at the end, towards the end of COVID, when the Middlesex Law Association had their annual meeting and they invited us. And Kathy and I talked about the benefits of paralegals being part of lawyer associations. You know, lawyers in Windsor refer WSIB claims to me all the time. In return, when my clients call me and they say, hey, I tell them, I don't do personal injury, but I know a couple of firms that do. Here you go. You know, it's that reciprocity. I think paralegals can be instrumental to lawyers. I do. And we have to cut out this competition. You know, paralegals are here to stay. We're not going away. We're only 16 years old. I know we're teenagers. We're getting there. We're getting there. We're going through some growing pains, but we're getting to where we need to be. And we have to be able to work with lawyers and gain that respect so that we can work harmoniously together. And it will benefit both paralegals and lawyers.
Now, Michelle, we've been talking, and you mentioned before about, you know, in my first term, here are some of the things that we're starting on, and I want to be able to carry them through. And perhaps there's some other things. So maybe, you know, a good time, you know, as before we kind of get to the conclusion here, you can share. And then you also mentioned, obviously, not advertising as much of the things that are happening. So what are some things that you know, you've been working on that you'd like to kind of see through if given another opportunity, and if there's anything more that needs to be done?
So I'd like to see through the FLSP, the education for the FLSP, how we can make, the license work, how we can add things into the scope of it. And because we're going to have these rights of appearances in Superior Court, then I think we should expand the scope, paralegal scope, so that we can do our own appeals. So those are two things that I want to make sure we can push through in this next term. I want to complete the review of exemptions. So I spearheaded exemptions over the last term. We got rid of some good exemptions. And the whole idea is to make sure that paralegals who are hired by the government are licensed paralegals. No more hiring people off the street who aren't licensed. You know, how would lawyers feel if Joe Blow was doing a lawyer's job, right? They'd get really peeved that they don't have a license to practice law, and that's what they're doing. So technically, it's an unauthorized practice, but because we've got bylaw 4 that allows for exemptions, you know, some of these exemptions still exist. So we worked hard at getting rid of the OWA exemption, the OEA exemption, the injured workers group exemption, but there are still others. And I think it's necessary to continue that work about to eliminate more of the exemptions. Do I think they'll all go away? No. I mean, how do you, we'd have a terrible time getting rid of family and friends. You know, they're allowed to show up, I don't know, 1 or 2 times a year, maybe 3. And we'd be hard pressed to talk the AG, the Attorney General, into getting rid of that exemption. So, but there are others that I really believe, like prosecutors, for instance, they should have to be licensed. And we can set sunset clauses, allow those who are there. I don't want to kick people out, but I want to be able to at least give them an opportunity to know that it's coming down the road. You know, January 2024, anybody that you hire from now on has to be licensed. What else? I want to keep doing the law association work. I want to push this collaboration between lawyers and paralegals, and continue to do that. I've got Windsor that I'm working on and have been for the last year. I want to keep pushing the non-traditional areas of practice for paralegals so they understand the opportunities that they have, so that they don't leave the profession, so that they know that there's really good work out there that they can do. I want to continue the education reforms. So, we've done a good job at looking what happened over the last 15 years. Okay, so here's what we think we can do after reviewing the comprehensive study and being licensed for 15 years. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I'm ready to do it.
Now, Michelle, again, as we get into election time, and as we've been discussing, the role of a bencher may not be as what others can see it. What would you say in terms of, in your last 4 years there, that you didn't realize when you got elected? And I remember you were sharing, Robert was there for 8 years, and Kathy Corsetti and Marianne Lippa for 4, right? That what do you kind of gain from that you didn't realize, and then now 4 years later you're like, well, now I'm ready to hit the ground running?
I got to tell you that I really enjoyed my bencher colleagues. I am forever grateful for everything I learned from them. I remember Marion saying to me, Michelle, good luck. And I said, with what? And she said, you're going to see how hard it is to change things here at the Law Society. It's a process, and it's hard to get through. And it is. It really is. I do think, though, that once you've figured out how it all works, and like I say, it takes a few years. I remember Rob saying in the first year, no new paralegal bencher says a word at convocation. And I didn't say a word, but I wasn't shy after that. And I think I've learned that I understand the governance piece, and a lot of people don't. So if you don't understand how a board of directors work, you really shouldn't be running for bencher. You really shouldn't. You'll do a disservice, because it's a huge learning curve to begin with. And so I've learned a ton. I've learned how the politics get played at the Law Society. I've learned, when to push my point and when to back off. You kind of have to learn the lay of the land. It's like any new job. And I feel like I've got that piece of it. So now I want to work with 4 new benchers. I'm running with Mike Redan, whom I love and has a great sense of humor. He's a well-respected paralegal. I'm running with Paula Callahan, who's done a ton of work for the CCLA in Ottawa. I'm running with Deborah Moria, who is, I just love her. She is the voice of reason. She's super smart. She's the president of the Ontario Black Paralegal Association. She does great work. And Dimitra Demokopoulos, who is very professional and understands the role of a bencher. So I'm hoping the 5 of us will be elected. I'm asking voters to please vote for me, vote for the other 4 on the coalition. I will work hard from now until April 28th. I will be phone calling people, as many as I can. I am already, and I'll be doing it right up to voting starts April 19th. I'll be doing it to April 28th. I take nothing for granted. I intend to work hard to get elected. And once I'm elected, my only promise I can make is that I will work hard for the paralegal profession in the name of access to justice.
Michelle, last couple questions here. I know you're coming to speak to some of the Kitchener students next week, but perhaps maybe you'll have a deeper answer then. But any words of wisdom for the paralegal students that are listening and watching this today?
JP, I would say to your students, any students watching, my dad used to tell me when I was young that I could go to the moon if I wanted to. And he was right. And I believed him. And I think it's so important for your students to know that they can be anybody they want to be if they're willing to put in the hard work. It comes with hard work, and it's worth it at the end of the day. I love what I do. I love it. If I didn't love it, I wouldn't be doing it. I quit being an adjudicator for the rental housing tribunal after 6 months because I didn't love it. So it's really important to find something that you're passionate about and then to pursue it. And don't give up on your dreams. Reach out to people and talk to them. Connect on LinkedIn. One of the most important things students can do is network. And when your students get elected, or when they pass their licensing exam and they get an invitation to the Law Society's welcome reception, go. Don't miss the opportunity. It's a great opportunity to meet the other benchers and to meet other students. And you just work a room. I know it sounds a little intimidating. It's not. We walk around the room and introduce ourselves and say, hey, you just graduated. What are you doing now? And that's great. And you passed your license. Oh, you started. Oh, that's great. Did you ever consider this? It's so important to make those connections. So I would tell your students to network, to reach for the moon, and don't give up if that's what they want. And please, don't just go to POA, small claims court, and LTV. You have other options. You can teach yourself what you need to know, or you can find a mentor or a coach through the Coach and Advisor Network at the Law Society. So don't give up on your dreams. Work hard. It's worth it. And the paralegal profession is a great profession. We have so much opportunity that's untapped yet.
Perfect. So last thing, I know you were just sharing about the other coalition members, but one last time here. And first of all, thanks so much, Michelle, for talking to me again. It's been a few different times we've spoken. But last time to all the paralegals that are listening, and why should they use a vote in the upcoming election on you?
Sorry, can you ask that again, JP?
Why should the paralegals that are watching, why should they vote for you?
So I would say because I'm leadership that they can trust, I'm experience they can trust. The Law Society needs some continuity. We shouldn't have a brain drain with nobody returning to convocation in the paralegal bencher area. And so we don't want to lose the institutional knowledge. Let's keep things moving. I don't do this because I'm trying to build my resume. I have no interest in being a justice of the peace. I have no interest in getting a job anywhere. I've got plenty of a job already. I do this because I care about paralegals. I do, and I care about the profession. I want to make it a greater profession than what it already is. So for that reason, I ask for your vote.
Perfect. Thanks again, Michelle, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. Take care.
Thank you, JP.